Hey, you got a minute? Or should I say, have you got a few minutes? Because I've got a couple stories for you are the most bizarre, the weirdest, the strangest, and the most gruesome. There's at least 2 stories like this in the Bible. And there's more gruesome ones. But this one just about knocks my socks off. Because life sometimes can be crooked. It can be a mess. My room's a mess, our house, only because we just got back from Indiana. My mother-in-law passed away in June, and so we were there for 3 weeks while she was passing, and then she died, and then we had the funeral and so on. Then we came home, and we just got back a week ago from Indiana to pick up some things in a trailer that had been willed to my wife. So it's my mother-in-law. So things have been topsy-turvy for me this summer. I've had half my summer and then doing other things to kind of catch up. So it's been busy. And life is like that. Life gets busy. Sometimes it gets nasty. Sometimes it gets horrible. And we hate it. But just remember the way God is always in it. Now I want to tell you a story. This is a story written by Megan Lipscomb. It's a personal financial editor, or she is a personal financial editor of BuzzFeed. Really weird story. Here goes. When I was young, my dad, my sister, and I often used to cycle to a local park. By the way, I just got a brand new bike, an electric bike. So if you see me riding around the place, just know that I've got a little help, a little assist. And it's a lot of fun. It's a beautiful bike. And I just want to give all the thanks to my wife, because she's the one that bought it for me. She had some extra money and she said, I want to buy you a bike. Pretty sweet, huh? That's what wives are all about, and spouses that love each other. Let's get back to the story. When I was young, my dad, my sister, and I, we used to cycle to a local park. One time when we were there, my sister and I were circling around the car park. And while my dad was still farther away at a play area, where it had swings and a seesaw for the little ones. So we're cycling along, she says, my sister and I, and this car came flying at them. And they heard somebody shout, which they presume was their dad, "Watch out, there's a car!" We cycled off the road and onto a verge, and several seconds later, a car driven by some nut was flying around the corner and narrowly missed us. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had that before walking. Somebody came right at me and then veered off the last minute. And I thought to myself, if I was the Flash, I'd be chugging up to that car and say, "What's wrong with you, buddy?" Anyway, we don't know. Maybe they were looking at their phone or whatever, but that's what happened. And so when they got back to the dad, they said, "Thanks, Dad, for warning us." He said, "What are you talking about? I didn't say anything." He said, "But I thought it. I thought it." Wow. That means even though he didn't yell, he thought it, and they heard it. Now, this is a true story. True story. Which, if that stuff like this happened to you, I'd sure like to hear about it. You could put it in the descriptions below, and make sure you subscribe too, because I really want to hear from you and know that you're there and know that you enjoy this. So, I've got some knives here. You see that? You have to be very careful with knives, okay? Because knives can hurt and even worse. This one has like a saw type of serrated edge on the knife, both for thicker stuff and for finer stuff, right there. And then, of course, it's got some grooves there. I really don't know what those are for. But then you've got the part of the knife that actually is a smooth but very, very sharp, which is why I'm doing it this way. I'm not doing it this way to cut into my knife. I'm doing it across it so it doesn't hurt me. but knives are meant to cut. Now this story I'm going to tell you about is so bizarre and so crooked and so bad. And we're going to look into it for a minute. So here it goes. There's a story about a Levite's concubine. A Levite was someone who was supposed to be a godly man, worked for God. And one day, his concubine, some writings that I've seen about what the Bible says wife. But let's just call her concubine. Concubine wouldn't be a wife, but would be like a wife, just not married. And in those days, kings did it. Now, I'm not saying it's right, because it's not. I've been married to my wife for all my married life, and I wouldn't have anybody else. And what some people do, they have wives and they had concubines. In this case, this Levite, why he did it, I don't know, but he had a concubine. And she left, the wife left the husband to embrace someone else. She essentially committed adultery. So, Judges 19:3 tells us that the Levite went after her to bring her home and beg her to be reconciled to him. Life is crooked, right? There was no king and no judge in Israel, and it's interesting because in those days, there wasn't really anybody as much as there was later when they had kings and guards and soldiers and so on to keep the peace in the kingdom. There wasn't any king. So there was a lot more adultery and bad things happening at times. And so that's partly what this story is about. And so he went to the father's house where he found out that his wife, concubine was, and he wanted to reconcile to her. When his father saw the Levite coming, he was very graceful to him. He was very nice. He treated him with respect. He treated him good and invited him into the home. Said, stay for a while. And maybe he did that because, he felt bad that he kind of condoned and let his daughter use his house while this is happening. And this, of course, was a time when, a lot of bad things happen. And it still happens today, adultery, that is. The Levites were taught and worked for God, so they tend to forgive. And this Levite seemed to be very forgiving. He came into the home. The father and the daughter were reconciled, the daughter with him, his being his concubine wife. And so he was with her and for a few days. It's so funny because he wanted to leave the Levite with his wife after the first night, and the father said, "No, just stay, and I'll feed you. I'll give you something to drink, and we can just have a good time talking. So just relax." So they did. The second night comes, same thing. He was gonna leave, the Levite that is, and he was gonna go and take his concubine wife with him. I say concubine wife, whichever one it was. So what happened was, again, the father said, no, why don't you just stay? And so that kept happening. And so finally, it got to, after several days, he says, no, wait, I can't stay any longer. The man said, okay, just one more time. Just one more day. It's been 4 days, all right? Just do it one more time. But, by then, he was all ready to go. And it wasn't in the morning. It was more like later on in the day. So he left and took his concubine. He didn't want to stay anymore. What they did is they came to a city in the tribe of Benjamin. And the servant that was with the Levite said, why don't we stay here? We'll stop and we'll stay overnight. But the Levite didn't want that. He didn't want to stay where there are strangers that are people not of his own kind. And so what they did was they went on And as the sun was going down, they finally got to Gibeah. And at that time, there were no inns, no public houses, no place to stay. So they ended up sitting in the city square. And they're just kind of sitting there and just waiting, asking people, would you let us stay in your home? Because at that time, the Levite would say, well, we've got our own stuff for our horse and donkey here. We've got enough for us. We'll even do something for you and entertain you or give you something just so you let us stay in return for their lodging. Didn't happen. What happened was no one would let them go to their home. But what happened, there was a man in Judges chapter 19, verse 16, a kind older man. He was a man of Mount Ephraim, and he only traveled in Gibeah. Now it appears that he had, since it was getting to be night and the sun was going down, it appeared that he had just gotten off work and he's coming home. He was kind to the Levite, concubine servant, and the horses, and he said, look, don't worry about it. He said, I'm fine. I have plenty of money. Why don't you just come and stay in my home? So he did. So the man let him come to his home. He had money, gave him feed, straw, and everything for his donkey and his servant, food for them and servant, and they stayed in the home. He was generous. Now it was nighttime, and so they ate and they had a good time together for a while and probably discussed what was happening in their lives and the things they'd been through. And it was nighttime, later in the night that is, that it was time to go to bed. And so everybody goes to sleep. They turn the candles down and the lights, and they, go to sleep. Well, after a while, in the night, evil men attacked the house. They came to the house and they were banging on the door, saying, bring that man out to us. Bring that man out to us. You like that word, yes? Bring that man out to us. And they were talking about the Levite. They wanted to abuse the Levite. They wanted to have relations with him. And so they were quite frankly homosexual men that lusted after him, thought he was a nice looking man and wanted him. But the good man of the house went out to them. The Levite said, stay back here, I'll talk to them, the man said, of the house. And he went out and he spoke kindly to him, and he said, do not do so wickedly, so very, very wickedly. But they wouldn't listen to him. And so the old man offered his daughter, but they refused. Now that's a confusing thing. You know why? Because I would never offer my daughter. But in those times, they were more pagan times. And they were times where that was kind of the rule, that you don't, the stranger, the invited person into your home is a person that you protect with your life and with your family. And so they would sometimes say, well, take someone else in my household. Lot had the same situation. Go look that one up. So what happened was, eventually, they kept banging and kept saying no. So the Levite brought his concubine to these evil men, or at least allowed them to get her, and probably allowed it to happen because he was for fear of his life. And they took her by force. Now, the Levite probably didn't want it, but they took by force, and the Levite either brought him to him or she was in the house. I don't really know. But they got a hold of his concubine. What happened was they abused her, they raped her, and then she was probably beaten, and all kinds of things happened that you wouldn't want to know about, that you can only imagine. And that kind of stuff happens today. That's a sad thing. And that's one thing that we need to understand. It happens today. People abuse others, or people who take children and women and sexually use them, and we have to pray against that. Yes, Satan's power will be diffused in that area. Very similar to what's happening here. Probably the Levite in the end thinking, what's going on? I got to go after her. But probably he was not going to do that because he was afraid of his life. So whether they slept that night or not, the next morning, they heard something at the door. Maybe it was scratching or something. Whether they heard it or they came and opened the door thinking she might be there. Either way, the concubine was there. She had fallen on the threshold of the house and the steps, and she was dead. The Levite didn't realize this. He goes up to her and he says, "Come on, wake up. We're going to go home. I'll take care of you. Let's go home. Let's go home." Now, just because the Bible doesn't record all the words that he said to her, he might have said some nice thing. Let's wash you up, honey, and let's go home. But she wouldn't move. So what'd he do? He put her on his donkey, and when the man rose up, he went away to his home. And when he entered the house, took one of these, got back to his home, lays his concubine down. I'm going to read it to you because it's probably a little better than I can say it. Taking a hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces. In other words, he cut her up, her body, into 12 pieces. Crooked world, crazy, supposedly godly Levite. Well, you can understand there was no laws in that time. He knew nobody would do anything about it. That's why he cut her up. What'd he do? He took divided her limb by limb, and every single one of those pieces, he sent to 12 pieces. Every single one of those 12 pieces, he sent to all the territory of Israel. All the tribes of Israel. So whoever's the head of those tribes got those pieces in the mail, so to speak. Can you imagine? Whether it was just bones or some flesh, we don't know. We just know parts of her body were sent, and it was used with a knife. Sometimes in this world we say, guns are shooting everybody, guns are killing everybody. No, they're not. There's a lot of other things killing a lot of people too. In this case, he sent it to all those people in Israel, and he said, consider it, take counsel, and tell me what you're going to do about it. Speak. Now, I'm not going to go into the next chapter, but you read the next chapter, chapter 20, and you'll see some more of what happens. But let's talk, to end this up, why did he do that? Well, we kind of alluded to it already, didn't we? The Levite wanted everyone in Israel to know this heinous wickedness that was done to his concubine. Nobody did anything about it. Nobody was going to do anything about it. There wasn't much law in that time. No kings to enact laws and to bring justice. So he made his own justice. So he was showing them that this evil was done to him and his wife or his concubine, and that it must never happen again. I'm going to tell you something. That Levite wanted justice. I think the Levite was thinking more in a pagan way, don't you? I know believers and Christians that love Jesus wouldn't do something like that. Even non-Christians that I know would never do something like that. These kind of things happened in the Bible. And sometimes what would happen in the Bible is one act of evil made another act of evil happen. In other words, there was revenge, and there was a way of saying, I'm going to take the law into my own hands because this is what happened to me. This is the punishment, the hurt and the killing or whatever has happened to me, and so I'm going to do this back. That's what he did. Now, I want you to understand something. Just because this is in the Bible does not mean ordained it. I want you to understand that a lot of the crooked, terrible things, right? Terrible things that happen in the Bible are as a result of sin. Sin that entered into the world, sin that brought death, hurt, and destruction to all mankind. And Satan is the head of that. He tempts men and women to do things they wouldn't normally do. In some cases, they would never normally do in their own mind. There's just no way. You take a person who eats other people, as horrible as that is, I'm sorry, eats other people. That's demonic. That comes from the devil. Doesn't come from man. You're not going to find people that are going to think about that unless they're totally sold out to Satan. Same thing with a lot of other things. Now, I'm not saying the Levite was sold out in this case, but I am telling you that the Levite didn't trust God for justice. And we need to trust God. Something bad happens to us, something makes us bitter, something hurts us, somebody did something to us. First of all, we need to forgive them. Second of all, we need to ask God to take care of it. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Now I want to make sure that you subscribe, and I want to make sure that you tell your friends about this, because if it's interesting to you, weird, strange, mystical things you would never expect to see in the Bible, but they're there. So I want you to keep listening and keep looking up and keep trusting God. And again, subscribe, and I'll see you next time when you got a minute.